Julian Assange's extradition to the United States was denied by a British judge, but his legal ordeal is far from over. We will take a look at how governments are dealing with whistleblowers. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. The founder of Wikileaks, Julian Assange, is still being held at a high-security London prison. He faces sweeping espionage charges in the United States, 18 counts of illegally obtaining, receiving and disclosing classified information. All told, the charges add up to a possible 175 years in prison. Documents he published relating to Iraq and Afghanistan revealed evidence of war crimes. Nicole Johnston has details of this legal battle from London.
It's been a decade-long ordeal for Australian Wikileaks founder Julian Assange, and it's not over yet. Earlier this month, a British court rejected a US extradition request for Assange. The judge was concerned about his mental health and decided he was a suicide risk if he was sent to the US.
This is
The US Justice Department maintains that Assange broke the law by publishing thousands of classified documents in 2010 and 2011 related to the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq.
how sweet it is.
He spent 7 years living in the Ecuadorian embassy in London from 2012 to 2019. There he avoided extradition to Sweden to face allegations of rape and sexual assault, which were later dropped. But it became an uncomfortable and awkward stay for both Assange and the embassy. Eventually, the Ecuadorians had enough and he was forced out. He's now in London's Belmarsh prison. The US is expected to appeal against the latest court decision. But Assange isn't the only one caught up in the drama. There's also Chelsea Manning. Manning is a former US Army intelligence analyst who was found guilty of leaking secret military files to WikiLeaks.
You can't come forward against the wall.
Another well-known whistleblower is Edward Snowden. In 2011, he claimed the US government was spying on its citizens. He's been living in exile in Russia since leaking National Security Agency files and is wanted in the US on espionage charges. Nicole Johnston, CGTN.
To talk more about how the US deals with whistleblowers, we welcome William Binney. He is a former technical director at the United States National Security Agency and a whistleblower himself. He joins us from Baltimore. Bill, great to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, as we just reported, that effort by the United States government to get Julian Assange extradited to the United States has failed. It was rejected by the court in Britain. The United States Department of Justice has said that it will appeal that ruling. Assange himself remains in a high-security prison in Britain. That's Britain's notorious Belmarsh prison. What do you make of this case so far?
Well, it's a total violation of the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States of having a free press, and all they're trying to do is silence the free press. The rest of the media don't seem to understand that, but that's really what they're going to face down the road after this is allowed to continue. It should be immediately rejected. I mean, how our government can continue to violate the constitutional rights of people around the world, especially publishers, which is what he is. He's a reporter. So, you know, it's a total violation of that First Amendment.
And if we look at Assange's condition right now, there are fears for his health, both mental and physical. Those fears have been expressed by both his lawyers as well as supporters. In fact, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture says that his imprisonment at Belmarsh prison amounts to, quote, psychological torture. What do you think they try to do to him here?
I felt that all along, because, you know, whistleblowers, especially in the national security area, or people who are publishing data on the national security issues, they really don't like them and they want to shut them up and intimidate them and continue to do all their criminal activity behind the classifications that they've slapped on all these violations of law, international law, U.S. law, and the U.S. Constitution. As well as human rights. I mean, so I just think they're trying to silence and crucify anybody they can. And what they want to do I'm quite sure, is get him back here to the United States, then change the charge under the Espionage Act, which they could then charge him and even give him the death penalty under that. But certainly give him at least 35 years in jail as a part of that. That's what they've done to other whistleblowers. That's what they tried to do to us. They fabricated evidence to try to do that to us, which is, I'm sure, what they're doing with that Julian Assange. They're fabricating evidence against him, too. I mean, this is typical of the FBI and the Department of Justice, which I now call the Department of Just Us, and we, the people of the United States, are not included, nor is anyone else in the world. So, you know, I just feel that they're just totally violent. These people are criminals. They should be brought up, indicted, and tried.
You know, with reference to the law that you mentioned there, the Espionage Act, Assange has been accused of violating that act. He's also been accused of violating laws pertaining to computer hacking and fraud as well. And we've known that recent U.S. administrations have resorted to using the Espionage Act very often against journalists. In fact, former President Barack Obama used that law against journalists more times than all other previous presidents put together. What message does it send to journalists, not just here in the United States, but around the world?
Well, I call this a move toward totalitarianism. There's another move. The first move was to spy on everybody in the planet, starting, of course, with everybody in the United States. And what that meant was they gave them evidence and information on everybody and what they're doing and who they're associated with and who they're operating with, what their plans are, everything they're thinking and planning and putting on paper or on the phone, or in a little chat or emails or anything else, is all a characteristic of people and their being and what their existence is all about, what they think and how they operate. And that's what they've been collecting for over 20 years now on just about everybody on the planet. The next move was to silence the information that anybody could get through any of the media. And that meant that controlling the narrative means you control what people have the option of seeing, like look at what Facebook and Twitter and Amazon are doing right now. They're trying to shut up not only the people who are using their facilities, but also those who are like using Parler and other kinds of communication systems. They're trying to shut them down too, so that no one can see anything except what they want them to see, which means they're controlling the narrative. They control basically what people think about or what they can, unless they just go off and just sit around and think about everything and all the possibilities. Otherwise, they don't have information. They have an uninformed public, an uninformed electorate, and therefore they get to manipulate them in any way they want. This would have been ideal. This is what Goebbels and the Nazis did. This is what the Stasi did. This is what the Soviet Union did, and other communist countries around the world. Dictatorships down through history have done this.
Bill, to what extent do you think presidents have been using this Espionage Act? This was a law that was passed in 1917. To what extent are they using it, or abusing it, I should say, because they're afraid that their lies and deceit will be exposed by the likes of Julian Assange?
Yeah, that's exactly the point. They can't handle the truth getting out because their criminality they cover with classification. And that's been, once you close the secret door, nobody in any government in the world cannot control or know exactly what their intelligence agencies are doing once they give them that ability to classify things and close that door behind them. And that means you can't see, or even the Congress here can't audit what NSA or CIA or FBI are doing. They don't really know for sure. They only know what they're told by those agencies. And that's basically a failure of the ability to audit, and a failure of the ability to know and direct and control what they're doing.
Right, Bill, there is a wider dimension to this, and this is the whole question of jurisdiction. I mean, if we look at this case, Julian Assange has been charged by the United States. He's in a British prison. He's an Australian citizen. Wikileaks does not have an office in the United States, yet the US is going after him. I mean, can any country in the world now go after any journalist anywhere in the world?
Well, I mean, if you're going to have reciprocity, yes, that would be true. And the whole point is that, you know, he is not a citizen in the United States, and he's not really, he didn't, as far as I know, there's no evidence coming out that he solicited any kind of criminal activity. That information was given to him, and he published it. So it's no different than The Guardian publishing some of the material from Snowden, or the New York Times, or the Washington Post. All of them have published material from Edward Snowden. which has been embarrassing to the U.S. government. Why? Because they've been committing all these crimes. They've been spying on everybody in the United States, a direct violation of the First and Fourth and Fifth and Sixth Amendments by having the FBI use that data to prosecute common crime inside the United States and then perjure themselves by doing parallel constructions and submitting other evidence in court of law and saying this is the reason we arrested them to begin with, which is an outright lie. So, I mean, it's just one lie begets another, and that's all that's been going on here. The entire government of the United States and the intelligence community has been lying to the public all along.
Right. You raised an important point there a moment ago, and that is the United States government has gone after Julian Assange, it's gone after Edward Snowden, but why has the government not gone after, let's say, the New York Times or the Guardian or the Washington Post or Der Spiegel, the German magazine?
That's the whole point. I mean, this is like the precedent setting issue. Once this happens, they're all liable. I mean, they have already gone against the Guardian, at least the British government has. They've gone after and had them break up their hard drives and destroy them. For all the hard drives that had the data from Edward Snowden, they did that. They didn't try to do that in the United States, though, but certainly a lot of it has stopped being published for quite some time. I haven't seen too much material coming from that for quite a while, and there's a lot of material that they haven't published at all. So.
Right. We've been hearing repeated calls for President Trump to grant a pardon to Julian Assange. Do you expect that to happen?
I would certainly hope so. I mean, it would say, he values truth and honesty above lies and corruption, which is what our government is now. I figured we're a banana republic now.
Right. If President Trump doesn't grant a pardon to Julian Assange, what are the chances of the incoming president, Joe Biden, granting a pardon? Because in the past, he's called Julian Assange a high-tech terrorist.
Yeah, I know. I don't think there's any probability of that occurring. I mean, I just think he'll continue trying to press for extradition of him and also try him here under the Espionage Act once he gets here.
William Binney, thanks so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Okay, let's bring in our panel right now to continue our discussion, all three here in Washington, D.C. Michael Daugherty is the founder of the Justice Society and author of The Devil Inside the Beltway, a book about U.S. government surveillance and overreach. John Sitilides is a geopolitical strategist at Trilogy Advisors, and via Skype, Bruce Fein is a constitutional lawyer and expert on international law. Thanks to all of you for joining us. John, let me start with you. We just heard the views there of William Binney, well-known whistleblower, very critical of what has happened to Julian Assange. What is your view in this case? Are these accusations valid? Did Julian Assange commit a crime, or was this investigative journalism that exposed war crimes?
I think it's very important, first of all, to place this in the proper context. There's a reason this kind of surveillance is taking place on the part of the United States government and other Western governments. And this was really triggered by the September 11, 2001 terror attacks, in which 3,000 Americans were murdered by radical Islamist terrorists. And so you had a unified movement in the U.S., in Europe, and in other parts of the world to try to ensure that this kind of catastrophic terrorist act would not reoccur. And the metadata collection that Mr. Binney was referring to was approved by both Republicans and Democrats in the Senate and in the House in the Bush administration and followed by the Obama administration. On the point of Julian Assange, I think it's a very interesting debate. And I know we're going to hear from Bruce Fein, who I respect very much as a legal expert, but there's a very honest and sincere legal debate among the finest legal minds in the United States as to whether or not Wikileaks is actually a journalistic platform or really a dumping ground for leaked documents that were obtained illegally. And the Supreme Court tried to handle this type of a matter with the Pentagon Papers several decades ago, which were illegally obtained, but then published by the New York Times, and that publication was protected by the Supreme Court. And it's a very good question today, Anand, as to whether or not anybody can just create a site on the internet and dump documents on them, whereas we expect in the United States, practically speaking, if not constitutionally protected, the idea that a journalistic platform engages in authentication, verification, exercises discernment and judgment, protects innocent lives and the like, so that there's a filter that didn't exist with WikiLeaks, and I think that's where there's going to be a very contentious debate.
Bruce Fein, John just raised a few questions there about WikiLeaks. Is it a publisher or a dumping ground?
I'm not sure whether that's the distinction that the First Amendment would draw. In the Pentagon Papers cases that was referenced, The Supreme Court didn't say that the New York Times was scot-free. It simply concluded that the United States had failed to show that the publication would cause direct, immediate, and irreparable harm to the national security, and therefore dismissed the effort to obtain an injunction. And in fact, the Solicitor General at the time, Dean Griswold, who was dean at Harvard Law School when I was there, said that there never was any suggestion that these classified documents created any threat to the national security of the United States, and none was shown when the publications were forthcoming. So I think that the dubiousness about the Espionage Act comes about because some courts, not the U.S. Supreme Court, have held that you don't need to prove that the publication in fact caused any injury to the United States. The mere fact that you could hypothesize the possibility of injury and that the information was classified, almost like the British Official Secrets Act, which we don't have in the United States, is sufficient to convict. And I believe that the real question for Assange is less, well, can you categorize him as a journalist because he doesn't do the vetting that the New York Times and Washington Post often do before they publish, as opposed to simply publishing information that he believes is in the public interest because it discloses unjustified government secrets, is protected speech. It determines, in my judgment, whether or not what is published is actually causing any genuine harm.
Right.
And as opposed to, and harm doesn't mean you embarrass the government or you disclose the government's engaged in illegalities and war crimes. That doesn't count as First Amendment harm. First Amendment harm would be like disclosing the location of troops or information about how to construct a biological weapon.
Right, Bruce, what about the government contention that Julian Assange revealed what they call methods and sources?
Well, I don't know whether it makes any difference. Methods and sources are something that's in the National Security Act, but that doesn't automatically show irreparable harm or injury. It's oftentimes said that some of the things Ed Snowden revealed, it gave a clue to Al-Qaeda that they were being surveilled and they would take methods of evasion. Well, people who are doing these bad things assume the government is trying to use methods to identify them. They weren't born yesterday, otherwise they wouldn't be terrorists. So simply by saying methods and sources, is not good enough. They have to show something more, concrete injury, if you're going to suppress free speech. And the reason is simply an academic one. The fact is, the history is that the government not always, but routinely lies about national security matters, whether it's WMD, whether it's a second torpedo attack on a vessel in the Tonkin Gulf, whether it's about a killing of an American soldier on American soil in the Mexican-American War. The tendency is to lie and to fabricate and to lie again.
Okay, Bruce, I want to get...
That's what governments do in wartime. In fact, we had a very famous senator, Hiram Johnson, who says, the first casualty in war is truth.
Right. I want to get to Michael. Michael, you work with whistleblowers. Julian Assange was the publisher of these documents. Is this U.S. action an assault on the free press? And I was wondering if you could also address John's point earlier on that the government, the United States became a surveillance state because of what happened on 9/11.
Well, they've always used, we want to save you and we're your savior, and they love that triangle of victim, villain, savior to justify what they do. But they're in action. If you watch what they do and not listen to what they say, they're not used to being out in the light in front of the public. And so that was the biggest thing that infuriated them about this. And I don't believe they have any intention of adjudicating this at all, because they know it'll tear everything apart and they very likely could lose. What they're doing is what I consider a 20th century and 21st century, actually 16th century trick of persecution through process. In the micro, they want to utterly destroy Julian Assange, and they're doing it through suffocation. And it's really execution with no fingerprints, what they've done to him and what they've made him do, and that's why the judge put the foot down and wouldn't let him be extradited. And they're fine with that, because in the macro, they want everyone else to see in the American press especially, what happens to you if you don't go along to get along. And we already have a huge lack of investigative journalism in this country, which is why Snowden went to Europe and Glenn Greenwald went to South America. So, I think this is just an observation of how they act, and I don't think they plan on going to court at all. They just want him dead, and they want everyone terrified of what they'll do to you.
John, the United States Department of Justice says it will appeal that British court's ruling. The Hill newspaper, which is a political newspaper here in Washington, says he could lose that appeal. But even if he wins, and I'm quoting here from The Hill, it says he still remains indicted and subject to, quote, rendition, unquote. That is, the article says, the kidnapping by the CIA. Is that what the U.S. legal system has come to, kidnapping?
No, that's the writer's opinion. It doesn't have any bearing on what the Justice Department's position is, either under the Trump administration or the incoming Biden administration. So I don't think it's very helpful here to argue as to whether or not an author's opinion is valid or not.
But it has been done before, rendition.
It's been done in other forms, and it's been done usually when there are well-suspected terrorists who are plotting to attack large civilian populations and engage in catastrophic acts of terrorism.
Okay, Bruce, what do you make of what Michael told us a moment ago about the fact that, this is justice by just keeping Julian Assange in prison by process?
First, I'd like to say renditions sometimes are against people who are not necessarily terrorists. The doctor in the Ricky Camarika case was kidnapped, taken to the United States, and he perhaps involved in drug illegalities, but he wasn't a terrorist. And then Omar Arar is another one. He was subject to rendition, and he was sent to Syria, where he was tortured, and he was innocent. The government does make mistakes. There's Mr. Masri as well, who was captured in rendition from Albania to prisons in Kabul, and he also was dumped back in Europe, and he was innocent. So there are cases where rendition is not legal and it's inaccurate. Even the famous Mossad in Israel got one of those who were allegedly involved in the Munich massacre wrong and killed him in Norway. So that's why we have due process, because governments can get things wrong, especially when lethal things are occurring. Now, what's happening to Julian Assange and what's the government motivation here? I agree that they really don't want to try Julian Assange because under the Classified Information Procedures Act, there would be additional classified information that would come out that the government doesn't want to come out. I think it's the same reason why the government has been very lax in trying to obtain Ed Snowden's appearance in the United States back for any kind of trial. And the result is, I agree, to try to make a spectacle of Julian Assange to create an interim effect against anyone else who might want to disclose the government's secrets. And I think it's important to remember, it is true that there can become harms. I'm not saying it's impossible that publications are always innocuous. But if you compare the danger of government crimes with the vast apparatus that government enjoys, that Bill Binney can testify to, and what happens when they remain secret and their crimes are concealed, it dwarfs the amount of mischief that can be caused by Julian Assange. Just think of this. We're sitting here now, years have elapsed since the disclosures, and where's the great calamities that happen? We don't see them, or if they are, they're very minor. Whereas we know the staggering amount of evil that can be perpetrated in government. Illegal spying and whatever, the family jewels disclosed by the CIA under Colby or otherwise. And we may still not know about them because Julian Assanges are the exception, not the rule.
Let me get a quick response from John here. John, what is your response to what we've just heard there? I mean, if we look at this, the track record on the part of the United States government when it comes to cases like this is not very pretty, is it?
I wouldn't say that at all. There may be some exceptions, and there may have been some grievous errors committed, But this often happens in the fog of war. And so we're engaged in a global war on terrorism. That has hopefully been moved to a different direction now with other strategic priorities for the United States and for the global West. But I want to get back to a point that Bruce raised earlier about we're not sure to what extent there was any significant damage. I don't think the public knows to what extent, say, the Iraqi network of translators and of suppliers for the U.S. military were exposed when Bradley Manning's secrets were published by WikiLeaks. We don't know the extent to which innocent civilians and their families were killed by terrorists in the Middle East because of those leaks. And until we know, it's very difficult to talk about what the actual reckoning was as a result of these grievous affairs.
Okay, Michael Daugherty, can we put this down to the...
I need to interject here. I apologize, but at the sentencing of Chelsea Manning, the government had a full opportunity to disclose all the things that you hypothesize may have occurred. And I'm not saying the hypothesize are ridiculous, but the government didn't come forth with anything of the type that you're mentioning. So, and that's what due process is.
Okay.
Has a chance, they forfeit it. What does the law then conclude? The evidence wasn't there.
Okay, let me go to Michael Daugherty. Michael Daugherty, can we put this all down to the fog of war?
No, that's lipstick on a pig, my favorite term. And I want to also point out the entire media apparatus stood down on reporting about Julian and let him rot in that embassy the second Donald Trump won, because that shocked them. Until that point, they assumed he was on their side. And when he started turning on them, that was the end of that. So you don't see the New York Times or the Washington Post especially caring about this at all. There's just no reporting on it. Now that we're at this point now, and we're at a bit of a tipping point because there is some newsworthiness that Britain's covering, you know, we have to cover a little bit. But they'll drop this like a hot potato again, because they also, you know, are also half-truthers in so many ways in the past 30 years especially. And it's disgusting. You know, civil rights are not secondary to we might be hurt in the fog of war. That's not how it rolls.
And Michael, looking at the broader picture, what kind of message does what we've been talking about here, what kind of message does it send to whistleblowers?
Well, it sends, you better be prepared for the fog of war. And most whistleblowers aren't armed for it. It is silence through intimidation, and it's destruction. It's political destruction. And quite frankly, the American public doesn't really support whistleblowers that much either. I mean, because you say things that are scary and sound crazy, and you're taking on the powerful. That's a really brave, tough thing to do. It'll destroy your life.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. And that is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.